Why do we assume that time moves in a straight line toward enlightenment? The ancient world is littered with anomalies, phenomena that defy logic and disrupt the steady narrative of evolutionary progress. Why were identical cultural motifs found across disconnected continents? How were massive stone blocks moved with such impossible precision? These are not coincidences, they are invitations to question our reality. Whether it is the Nazca Lines etched into the desert floor or the erratic patterns of ancient subterranean cities, these enigmas represent a persistent glitch in the matrix of our history. We are surrounded by echoes of a superior knowledge, yet we remain trapped by the arrogance of our current technological vantage point, failing to see what our ancestors clearly understood. Deir el-Medina Ostraca should not exist in the form we know them today. Most ancient civilizations left behind monuments, temples, palaces, and royal inscriptions designed to project power across centuries. Ancient Egypt was no exception. The walls of temples celebrated military victories, pharaohs were depicted as divine rulers, and official text carefully controlled how history would be remembered. Yet on the west bank of the Nile, near modern Luxor, archaeologists uncovered something entirely different. Scattered across the ruins of Deir el-Medina, a workers' village occupied between approximately 1550 and 1070 BC during Egypt's New Kingdom period, were thousands upon thousands of broken limestone flakes and pottery fragments covered with writing and drawings. These objects, known as Ostraca, were never intended to survive. They were the notebooks, memoranda, sketches, complaints, calculations, and personal records of the craftsmen responsible for excavating and decorating the royal tombs in the nearby Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens. What makes the discovery extraordinary is not simply the number of texts recovered. It is the fact that these fragments reveal an Egypt that official monuments never intended anyone to see. The village itself was established during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep I and continued to operate for roughly 5 centuries. Its inhabitants were highly skilled specialists employed by the state to construct and decorate royal tombs. Excavations conducted by French archaeologist Bernard Bruyère between the 1920s and 1950s transformed Deir el-Medina into one of the most intensively studied archaeological sites in Egypt. Thousands of ostraca emerged from houses, rubbish dumps, workshops, and abandoned structures. Unlike papyrus, which was relatively expensive, broken limestone flakes and discarded pottery provided convenient surfaces for writing. The result was an accidental archive, unlike anything else from the ancient world. Scholars estimate that more than 10,000 inscribed ostraca have been recovered from the site, preserving text written primarily in hieratic, the cursive script used for daily administration, alongside examples of hieroglyphic writing and sketches created by artists working on royal projects. One of the greatest mysteries raised by these texts concerns literacy. For much of the 20th century, historians assumed that literacy in ancient Egypt was restricted to a small administrative elite. The ostraca from Deir el-Medina complicate that picture significantly. The village contained scribes, foremen, craftsmen, painters, stonecutters, and labourers, yet written communication appears throughout every aspect of daily life. Researchers such as Jack Jansen and Andrea McDowell have documented evidence suggesting that literacy, or at least functional familiarity with written texts, was far more widespread within this specialised community than previously believed. Numerous exercises used for teaching writing have been discovered among the ostraca, indicating that literacy was actively transmitted across generations. Some families produced scribes for centuries, creating hereditary traditions of education. The question that continues to intrigue scholars is whether Deir el-Medina was an exceptional case because of its connection to royal projects, or whether literacy levels elsewhere in New Kingdom Egypt have been systematically underestimated due to a lack of surviving evidence. The ostraca also preserve one of the most remarkable episodes in labour history. During the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III in the 12th century BC, workers began experiencing delays in the grain payments that formed their wages. Official records and related ostraca reveal growing frustration within the community. Instead of continuing work, the labourers abandoned their tasks and staged organised protests. They marched to nearby temples, demanded overdue rations, and refused to resume work until their grievances were addressed. Egyptologist Yaroslav Cherny and later scholars identified these documents as evidence for what is widely regarded as the earliest recorded labour strike in human history. The event shattered the traditional image of an all-powerful state functioning without resistance. It revealed economic instability, bureaucratic failures, and social tensions during the later New Kingdom. More importantly, it demonstrated that ordinary workers possessed enough collective organisation and confidence to challenge royal authorities when their livelihoods were threatened. Another mystery emerges from the relationship between the villagers and the tombs they built. The craftsmen of Deir el-Medina possessed intimate knowledge of some of the most secure burial complexes in Egypt. They knew the locations of hidden chambers, the layout of tunnels, and the placement of valuable funerary goods. During the political and economic crises that affected Egypt toward the end of the New Kingdom, tomb robbery became increasingly common. Judicial papyri from the period describe investigations into widespread looting, while Ostraca provide additional glimpses into local concerns and administrative responses. Historians continue debating the extent to which members of the royal workforce may have participated in these crimes. No definitive evidence proves that the majority of workers engaged in tomb robbery, yet the possibility remains difficult to dismiss. If individuals with unparalleled access to royal tombs became involved in looting, the greatest threat to Egypt's sacred burials may have come not from foreign invaders, but from those entrusted with protecting them. The artistic ostraca discovered at Deir el-Medina introduce another layer of mystery. Many contain preliminary sketches used by artists before transferring the designs onto tomb walls. These drawings provide rare insight into the creative process behind some of the most famous monuments of ancient Egypt. Figures were carefully proportioned according to established artistic conventions, and corrections made by individual artists can still be traced on the stone surfaces. Archaeologists have compared these sketches to modern architectural drafts because they preserve stages of planning that are normally lost once a project is completed. Certain ostraca contain alternative designs that were never executed, raising questions about how artistic decisions were made and who possessed the authority to approve final compositions. They reveal a level of experimentation that official monuments often conceal. Among the most puzzling finds are the satirical and humorous drawings that appear on some ostraca. Unlike the highly formal art associated with temples and tombs, these images often depict a world turned upside down. Cats are shown serving mice, animals perform human activities, and traditional social hierarchies appear inverted. One famous example portrays mice as noble figures while cats occupy subordinate roles. Egyptologists have debated the meaning of these scenes for decades. Some interpret them as political satire, others view them as visual jokes, and still others argue that they may have illustrated stories or moral lessons now lost to history. Because no accompanying explanations survive, their true meaning remains uncertain. What is clear is that these drawings expose a side of Egyptian culture rarely visible in official state-sponsored art. They demonstrate that humour, parody, and social commentary existed alongside religious and political authority. The ostraca also preserve valuable evidence concerning medicine, religion, and scientific observation. Several texts record illnesses, treatments, absences from work, and consultations involving healers. Administrative records explain why workers miss shifts, sometimes citing eye infections, scorpion stings, fevers, or family emergencies. Other inscriptions contain references to religious rituals, festivals, and interactions with local deities worshipped by the community. Particularly intriguing are fragments connected to timekeeping and astronomical observations. While none provide revolutionary scientific discoveries, they suggest that practical knowledge of calendars, seasonal cycles, and celestial phenomena played an important role in organizing labor and ritual life. Because many texts survive only as fragments, scholars frequently encounter references to documents or traditions that no longer exist. This creates one of the most persistent mysteries surrounding Deir el-Medina. The ostraca represent only the surviving scraps of a much larger intellectual world. For every text recovered by archaeologists, countless others were likely destroyed by time, climate, and human activity. Naga Lion Temple is a monument that raises a question archaeologists still cannot fully answer. Why did Khmer builders place two of the most powerful symbols in their religious world, the Naga and the lion, together within a single sacred space? Across the ancient Khmer Empire, temples were designed as physical representations of the universe, and every sculpture carried meaning. Yet at Naga Lion Temple, the combination of serpent guardians associated with water and mythical ancestry, alongside lion guardians representing authority and protection, suggests a deeper purpose that remains partly hidden beneath centuries of history. The temple belongs to the architectural tradition of the Khmer civilization, one of the most powerful empires in Southeast Asia between the 9th and 15th centuries. Archaeological surveys are conducted during the French colonial period, particularly by researchers from the École Française d'Extrême-Orient, documented numerous Khmer temples where Naga balustrades and lion statues appeared as protective elements. However, the symbolism becomes more intriguing when examined together. According to Khmer tradition recorded in later Cambodian chronicles, the Khmer people trace their legendary origins to the union of the Indian prince Kaundinya and the Naga princess Soma. This myth transformed the Naga into far more than a religious creature. It became a symbol of divine ancestry and legitimacy. The lion, introduced through Indian religious influence, represented royal power and sacred protection. When visitors approached a temple guarded by both creatures, they were not simply entering a building. They were entering a carefully designed sacred landscape intended to express authority, divine approval, and cosmic order. The first mystery revolves around why this symbolic combination appears so frequently in Khmer sacred architecture. Archaeologists such as George Coedes argued during the 20th century that Khmer temples functioned as miniature models of the cosmos. In this interpretation, Naga figures represented the boundary between the human world and the divine realm. Crossing a Naga-lined causeway symbolized moving from ordinary space into sacred territory. Lions then served as guardians protecting that holy domain. The concept sounds straightforward, yet the scale of investment required to create these monuments suggests the symbolism was considered extremely important. Skilled artisans spent years carving massive sandstone sculptures that could have been replaced with simpler structures if decoration alone had been the goal. Instead, rulers repeatedly invested enormous resources into reproducing the same imagery across multiple generations. The engineering behind these sculptures creates another mystery. Khmer builders relied heavily on sandstone, a material quarried, transported, carved, and assembled without modern machinery. Research conducted at the Phnom Kulen quarries, which supplied stone for many Khmer monuments, revealed evidence of large-scale extraction and transportation operations. Some stone blocks weighed several tons. Archaeologists studying Khmer construction methods have found that builders achieved remarkable precision despite lacking iron cranes, powered tools, or wheeled transport systems capable of carrying the largest blocks. At Naga Lion Temple, the surviving sculptures demonstrate careful symmetry and proportional design. The curves of the serpent bodies and the balanced posture of the lions required planning and craftsmanship that modern observers often underestimate. The question is not whether ancient craftsmen were capable. The evidence proves they were. The question is how they consistently achieved such precision across an empire covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. The relationship between the Naga and water introduces another layer of mystery. Throughout Khmer civilization, water management determined survival. Seasonal monsoon cycles created periods of flooding followed by months of drought. To solve this challenge, Khmer engineers constructed one of the largest hydraulic systems in the pre-industrial world. Archaeologist Bernard Philippe Grolier first proposed the concept of Angkor as a hydraulic city, and later research using airborne LiDAR surveys led by Damien Evans confirmed the existence of vast networks of reservoirs, canals, embankments, and waterways connected across the landscape. Within this context, the Naga appears repeatedly wherever water played a significant role. The serpent was not merely a religious symbol. It represented the force that sustained agriculture, supported cities, and legitimized royal authority. At Naga Lion Temple, the presence of Naga imagery may indicate a connection to broader water management systems that once surrounded the site. If so, the sculptures served both symbolic and political purposes, reminding visitors that control over water meant control over society itself. Another puzzle involves the temple's orientation. Many Khmer monuments display precise alignments with cardinal directions. The most famous example is Angkor Wat, whose orientation and astronomical relationships have been studied extensively by scholars. While Naga Lion Temple is less famous, Khmer architects rarely ignored directional planning. Establishing accurate alignments required surveying techniques, geometric understanding, and long-term planning. Archaeologists continue to debate how much astronomical knowledge influenced Khmer architecture, but the repeated appearance of carefully organized layouts across the empire suggests these alignments were deliberate rather than accidental. The possibility that temples were designed according to celestial observations adds another dimension to the monument's significance. What survives today may represent only a fraction of the original structure. This creates one of the greatest challenges facing archaeologists. Stone sculptures endure for centuries, but many other components of Khmer temples were constructed from wood. Roofs, galleries, ceremonial structures, and decorative elements often disappeared long ago due to decay, weather, warfare, or human activity. As a result, modern researchers are forced to reconstruct entire sacred environments from incomplete remains. The lions and Naga figures visible today may once have formed part of a much larger symbolic program. Additional sculptures, inscriptions, and architectural features could have clarified the monument's purpose. Yet many of these elements have vanished forever. Looting further complicated the puzzle. Throughout the 20th century, numerous Khmer artifacts were removed from archaeological contexts and entered private collections or international art markets. When an artifact is separated from its original location, valuable information disappears with it. Archaeologists lose evidence about how sculptures were positioned, how they related to surrounding structures, and what role they played within the larger site. In many cases, the missing context is more important than the artifact itself. Naga Lion Temple likely suffered from the same problem affecting countless ancient monuments across Southeast Asia. March 1974. A wildfire had recently burned through part of Fort George Island near Jacksonville, Florida, when Antoine and Gary Betts made a discovery that would become one of the strangest mysteries of modern America. While inspecting the scorched area around their property, they found a smooth metallic sphere resting among the burned vegetation. The object measured roughly 8 inches in diameter, weighed about 22 pounds, and appeared almost perfectly manufactured. Aside from a small triangular marking, there was nothing unusual about its appearance. The Betts family brought the sphere home simply because it looked interesting. Within weeks, however, they would claim that the object behaved in ways that seemed impossible for an ordinary steel ball. According to interviews given by the family and reported by newspapers, including the St. Petersburg Times and the New York Times during 1974, the sphere began displaying unusual movement when placed on the floor of their house. Instead of rolling in a straight line and gradually stopping, it sometimes altered direction unexpectedly. Family members claimed that when the sphere was rolled across a room, it occasionally curved away from its original path, and in some cases appeared to return toward the persons who had pushed it. Even more surprising were reports that the object seemed capable of avoiding the edges of tables. The Bettses stated that when the sphere approached a drop, it often changed direction before falling. To them, the movement appeared deliberate rather than random. As word spread among friends and neighbours, curiosity surrounding the object increased. The family continued experimenting with the sphere and reported additional strange behaviour. One of the most frequently repeated stories involved music. According to Terry Betts, the family's son, the sphere sometimes reacted when a guitar was played nearby. He claimed that certain notes appeared to trigger vibrations or resonant sounds from within the object. Newspapers covering the story described how the sphere produced humming or ringing tones that seemed unusually strong for a simple metal ball. These accounts helped transform a local curiosity into a regional mystery. By the spring of 1974, journalists had begun visiting the Betts' home to witness demonstrations firsthand. Television stations filmed the sphere rolling across floors while reporters documented the family's observations. At a time when public fascination with UFOs and unexplained phenomena was particularly high in the United States, the story quickly attracted national attention. Many readers and viewers wondered whether the sphere could be connected to something extraordinary. Some speculated that it might be a piece of advanced technology. Others suggested it could be a classified military device, a scientific instrument, or even an object of extraterrestrial origin. None of these theories were supported by evidence, but the lack of an immediate explanation allowed them to flourish. The mystery deepened because the sphere appeared unusually well constructed. Observers noted its polished surface and precise shape. Unlike a homemade object or a piece of common scrap metal, it looked professionally manufactured. This led some investigators to suspect that it had an industrial purpose. Yet the family maintained that the object's behavior could not be explained by ordinary engineering. As public interest grew, experts were invited to examine the sphere and determine whether there was anything truly unusual about it. One of the most important developments occurred when the object attracted the attention of the United States Navy. The involvement of military specialists immediately elevated the story. Many members of the public assumed that if government experts were willing to investigate, the sphere must possess unusual characteristics. Navy personnel examined the object and conducted tests to determine its composition and structure. According to reports published at the time, the sphere was found to be made primarily of stainless steel. Investigators also determined that it was not completely solid. Internal features or cavities appeared to exist within the object, a finding that could potentially explain some of the sounds reported by the family. Additional analysis revealed that the sphere closely resembled a component used in industrial ball valves. These valves regulate the flow of liquids and gases through pipelines, and often contain precisely manufactured steel balls designed to withstand extreme pressure. Engineers noted that the size, weight, and material of the Bethe sphere were consistent with such equipment. This explanation was not particularly exciting, but it fit the available physical evidence better than theories involving secret technology or extraterrestrial origins. Even after this identification, however, debate continued. Supporters of the mystery argued that the industrial valve explanation failed to account for the sphere's unusual movement. Critics responded that many of the reported behaviours could be explained through ordinary physics. Floors that appear perfectly level often contain slight slopes that are difficult to detect. A heavy sphere with an uneven internal weight distribution can roll unpredictably and follow curved paths. Engineers pointed out that a hollow metallic object can also produce resonant sounds when exposed to vibrations or specific frequencies. In their view, the sphere's behaviour did not require extraordinary explanations. The disagreement reflected a broader pattern common to many famous mysteries. Witnesses observed events they considered unusual, while investigators searched for explanations rooted in known science. Because most demonstrations of the sphere occurred in informal settings rather than controlled laboratory environments, neither side was able to provide definitive proof. The family remained convinced that the object possessed unusual characteristics, while skeptics argued that expectation and observation bias played a major role in shaping perceptions of its behaviour. Throughout 1974 and 1975, the Bethe sphere continued appearing in newspapers, television broadcasts, and radio discussions across the United States. The object became part of a growing collection of modern mysteries that captured public imagination during the decade. Unlike legendary lost treasures or ancient artifacts, the sphere was a contemporary mystery that ordinary people could examine and debate. Its story combined eyewitness testimony, media attention, scientific investigation, and government involvement in a way that few unexplained objects ever achieve. More than 50 years later, the Bethe sphere remains one of the most famous unexplained object cases in American history. The strongest evidence suggests it was an industrial valve component discovered by chance after a wildfire on Fort George Island. Yet the reports published in 1974, the family's testimony, and the unusual circumstances surrounding the discovery continue to keep the mystery alive. What began as a simple metal sphere found in the aftermath of a fire became a national phenomenon that demonstrated how quickly an ordinary object can evolve into a lasting mystery when questions emerge faster than answers. Around 4700 BC, while most of Europe was still covered with small farming villages, a settlement in what is now northeastern Bulgaria was accumulating wealth on a scale that archaeologists once believed impossible for the period. The site is known today as Solnitsata, located near the modern town of Provadia, about 40 kilometers west of Varna on the Black Sea coast. When Bulgarian archaeologists began extensive excavations there under the direction of Professor Vasil Nikolov from the National Institute of Archaeology with Museum at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, they expected to find another prehistoric settlement. Instead, they uncovered evidence suggesting that one of Europe's earliest centres of wealth, trade, and social hierarchy had emerged here nearly 7,000 years ago. The mystery surrounding Solnitsata is not based on legends or lost civilizations. It is based on a far more difficult question. How did a community living long before writing, iron, or organized states become rich enough to build massive stone fortifications and possibly influence the rise of the oldest known gold culture in the world? The answer begins with something that seems ordinary today: salt. Archaeological evidence shows that Solnitsata developed around a natural brine spring. Excavations uncovered large quantities of specialized ceramic vessels used to evaporate salt water and produce solid salt cakes. According to research published by Bulgarian archaeologists, production began around 5500 BC and continued for many centuries. To modern people, salt appears inexpensive and abundant, but in prehistoric societies, it was one of the most valuable resources available. Salt was essential for human health, livestock, and food preservation. Without refrigeration, communities depended on salt to store meat and other foods for long periods. A settlement capable of producing large amounts of salt possessed something every surrounding population needed. This is where Solnitsata becomes unusual. Archaeologists believe the settlement was not merely producing salt for local consumption. Evidence suggests it was generating substantial surpluses that could be exchanged through regional trade networks. The site contains thousands of remains associated with salt production, indicating activity on a scale rarely seen elsewhere in prehistoric Europe. Some researchers have even described Solnitsata as Europe's earliest known salt production centre. If that interpretation is correct, the settlement effectively controlled a strategic resource during a period when few comparable sources existed. Wealth did not come from gold mines or precious stones. It came from controlling access to what many scholars have called the prehistoric equivalent of money. The economic importance of the site may explain another remarkable discovery. Solnitsata was surrounded by massive stone defensive walls. Excavation reports have identified several phases of fortification construction dating to the 5th millennium BC. These walls were built from large stone blocks and represented an enormous investment of labor. Professor Nikolov has argued that they are among the earliest stone fortifications known in Europe. Their existence immediately creates a mystery. Why would a prehistoric community need defenses of this scale? Most contemporary settlements were relatively open villages with limited signs of military architecture. Solnitsata appears fundamentally different. The people living there clearly believe they possess something worth protecting. One possibility is that the wealth generated by salt production attracted conflict. Valuable resources have often produced competition throughout human history, and prehistoric Europe was unlikely to be an exception. Communities seeking access to salt may have viewed Solnitsata as both an economic opportunity and a strategic target. The construction of defensive walls suggests that the inhabitants anticipated threats and possessed the organizational capacity to respond. Building such fortifications required planning, leadership, and coordinated labor. This level of organization challenges older assumptions that European societies of the period were simple agricultural communities lacking social complexity. The evidence for emerging social hierarchy becomes even more significant when Solnitsata is compared with discoveries made nearby at Varna. In 1972, construction worker Rachel Marinov accidentally uncovered a prehistoric cemetery near the city of Varna. Archaeological excavations led by Ivan Ivanov revealed more than 300 graves dating to approximately 4600 to 4200 BC. Among them were thousands of gold artifacts weighing over 6 kilograms in total. Today, the Varna necropolis is widely recognized as containing the oldest known worked gold in the world. Some graves held extraordinary concentrations of wealth, particularly grave 43, where a male individual was buried with hundreds of gold objects. The discovery forced archaeologists to reconsider when social inequality first appeared in Europe. The connection between Varna and Solnitsata remains one of the most debated questions in Balkan archaeology. No document exists linking the two sites because writing had not yet appeared in the region. However, their chronology overlaps. They are located relatively close to one another, and both demonstrate unusual concentrations of wealth. Several researchers have suggested that economic activity generated by salt production may have contributed to the prosperity visible in the Varna culture. Although direct proof remains unavailable, the theory is supported by a simple observation. Valuable trade networks require valuable commodities, and few resources in prehistoric southeastern Europe appear to have been as important as salt. Another mystery concerns the technological knowledge required to maintain production. Salt extraction through evaporation sounds simple, but large-scale manufacturing required a constant supply of fuel, durable pottery, organized labor, and careful management of resources. Archaeologists have found evidence that the inhabitants repeatedly improved their production systems over centuries. This suggests accumulated technical knowledge passed between generations. The settlement was not surviving from season to season. It was operating a specialized industry long before the emergence of states, written administration, or formal economic institutions. The scale of labor visible at Solnitsata also raises questions about leadership. Someone had to organize construction projects, manage production, and coordinate trade. Yet archaeologists have not identified a palace, royal tomb, or obvious ruling center comparable to those found in later civilizations. Power may have existed in forms that leave fewer traces in the archaeological record. This uncertainty makes Solnitsata particularly fascinating because it captures a period when wealth and social hierarchy were emerging, but had not yet developed into the political systems familiar from ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. The settlement eventually declined during the late Chalcolithic period, and researchers continue to debate why. Some point to broader disruptions that affected societies across southeastern Europe during the 5th millennium BC. Others suggest environmental changes, shifting trade routes, or increasing regional instability. The available evidence does not support a single definitive explanation. What is clear is that a community which once controlled one of the most valuable resources in prehistoric Europe gradually disappeared from history. Adam's calendar is a monument that should not be at the center of one of archaeology's most controversial debates. Standing on a hilltop near Kapshohoop in South Africa's Mpumalanga province, the site appears deceptively simple. A series of granite stones form an elliptical arrangement overlooking the surrounding landscape. There are no giant pyramids, no buried temples, no inscriptions, and no treasures. Yet this remote stone circle has generated claims so extraordinary that if proven correct, they would force historians to rewrite much of human history. The mystery is not hidden beneath the ground. The mystery is whether this monument is simply a prehistoric stone circle or evidence of knowledge that existed far earlier than anyone thought possible. The site attracted international attention in the early 2000s through the work of South African pilot Johan Heine and researcher Michael Tellinger. According to Heine, aerial observations revealed that several stones appeared aligned with significant solar positions. Further investigation suggested that shadows cast by the stones could mark seasonal changes throughout the year. This led to the modern name Adam's calendar, based on the theory that the monument functioned as an ancient astronomical calendar. The idea immediately drew comparisons with famous prehistoric observatories, such as Stonehenge in England and Newgrange in Ireland. Both structures demonstrate that ancient societies possessed sophisticated knowledge of the movements of the sun. The question was whether a similar phenomenon existed in southern Africa, and if so, how old it might be. The astronomical alignments remain one of the most intriguing aspects of the site. Researchers have reported that certain stones correspond to solstice and equinox positions, potentially allowing observers to track the annual solar cycle. Ancient cultures across the world frequently incorporated astronomy into architecture. The builders of Stonehenge aligned stones with the summer solstice sunrise. The creators of Newgrange designed a passage that fills with sunlight during the winter solstice. Peru's Chanquillo complex contains towers specifically positioned to track the sun's movement across the horizon. If Adam's calendar was intentionally aligned in a similar manner, it would suggest that prehistoric populations in southern Africa were also observing and recording celestial events. What remains uncertain is whether the alignments were deliberately engineered or are partly the result of natural coincidence. The greatest controversy surrounding Adam's calendar concerns its age. Michael Tellinger and several supporters proposed that the monument could be approximately 75,000 years old. Such a date would place it tens of thousands of years before any accepted monumental architecture currently known to archaeology. For comparison, Stonehenge is roughly 5,000 years old. The Great Pyramid of Giza is approximately 4,500 years old. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, widely recognized as one of the oldest monumental religious sites on Earth, dates to about 11,500 years ago, a confirmed age of 75. 000 years would push organized stone construction back into a period when humans were still living as hunter-gatherers. It would represent one of the most significant archaeological discoveries ever made. The problem is that no accepted archaeological evidence currently supports such an extreme date. Unlike wood, bone, or charcoal, stone itself cannot be directly radiocarbon dated. Archaeologists normally determine the age of monuments through associated artifacts, occupation layers, tools, or organic remains found nearby. In the case of Adam's calendar, no peer-reviewed study has established an age remotely close to 75,000 years. Mainstream archaeologists therefore remain highly skeptical, yet the absence of agreement has only intensified public fascination because the claim is so extraordinary. The site sits in a strange position between accepted archaeology and alternative history, where every new observation generates more questions than answers. The mystery becomes even larger when the surrounding landscape is examined. Adam's calendar is not an isolated structure. Across parts of Mpumalanga and neighbouring regions, thousands of stone circles, enclosures, and walls have been documented. Aerial surveys reveal vast networks of stone features stretching across the landscape. Archaeologists generally interpret many of these structures as settlements built by Iron Age farming communities that occupied southern Africa during the last millennium. Research by scholars including Tim Maggs has linked numerous stone-walled sites to cattle herding societies and regional agricultural economies. However, alternative researchers argue that the scale of the network suggests a far older and more complex story. Some estimates claim that tens of thousands of stone structures exist throughout the region. Whether these features represent separate settlements, interconnected communities, ceremonial landscapes, or something else entirely remains an active area of study. Another reason Adam's calendar attracted attention is its proximity to regions associated with ancient mining. Southern Africa contains some of the world's richest gold deposits. Tellinger has argued that the stone circles may have been connected to prehistoric mining activities. Archaeological evidence confirms that ancient mining existed in Africa long before recorded history. One frequently cited example is Ngwenya mine in present-day Eswatini, where evidence indicates that prehistoric people extracted hematite tens of thousands of years ago. Archaeologists have estimated that some mining activity at the site dates back approximately 43,000 years. This demonstrates that early humans possessed greater technical abilities than many people assume. However, evidence for ancient mining does not automatically prove the existence of a lost civilization, and archaeologists caution against drawing conclusions that exceed available data. Adding another layer to the mystery are claims involving unusual acoustic properties. Some visitors have reported that certain stones produce resonant tones when struck. Tellinger suggested that the builders may have understood sound and vibration in ways that remain poorly understood today. Similar phenomena exist elsewhere in the world. Ringing rocks and naturally resonant stone formations have been documented in multiple countries. Whether the acoustic properties at Adam's calendar played any intentional role in the monument's design remains unknown. No widely accepted archaeological study has confirmed that sound was part of the site's original function, but the possibility continues to attract attention because ancient cultures often combined astronomy, ritual, and landscape architecture. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Adam's calendar is that both believers and skeptics agree on the basic facts, while disagreeing completely on their meaning. The stones are real, the alignments can be observed, the surrounding region contains thousands of archaeological features. Ancient mining activity is well documented elsewhere in southern Africa, yet the monument's age, purpose, and cultural context remain unresolved. To supporters, Adam's calendar may preserve traces of forgotten knowledge from humanity's distant past. To archaeologists, it represents a site where extraordinary claims have outpaced the available evidence. More than 2 decades after it entered public discussion, the stone circle continues to challenge researchers because the central mystery has never been answered. Who built it, why they built it, and whether it is merely an impressive prehistoric monument or something far more significant, remain questions that the stones themselves refused to explain. Khor Rori should never have become one of the most important ports in the ancient world. Standing on the southern coast of modern Oman, approximately 40 kilometers east of Salalah, in the Dofa region, the city occupied a narrow lagoon where the waters of Wadi Darbat met the Arabian Sea. Today the site appears isolated and quiet, surrounded by rocky hills and coastal plains, but more than 2,000 years ago it sat at the center of a commercial system that connected Arabia, India, East Africa, and the Mediterranean. Archaeologists identify Khor Rori with the ancient port of Moshe Liman, described in the 1st century text known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek navigational guide used by merchants sailing across the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. What continues to puzzle researchers is not simply that a port existed here, but how a relatively small settlement located on the edge of a harsh desert environment managed to control one of antiquity's most valuable trades and sustain international connections across thousands of kilometers. The site first attracted serious archaeological attention during the 20th century, and extensive excavations carried out by the Italian Archaeological Mission revealed the remains of a fortified city founded around the 3rd century BC. Inscriptions discovered within the ruins link the settlement to the Kingdom of Hadramaut, one of the powerful South Arabian states that dominated the frankincense trade. These inscriptions, combined with architectural evidence and imported artifacts, transformed Khor Rori from a forgotten ruin into one of the most important archaeological sites in Arabia. The city was not built by accident. Massive stone walls surrounded the settlement, while administrative buildings, warehouses and storage facilities occupied strategic positions inside the enclosure. The level of planning visible throughout the site immediately raised questions about the sophistication of the people who built it. The wealth of Khor Rori came from a substance that appears surprisingly ordinary. Frankincense, harvested from boswellia trees growing in the mountains of Dhofar, was among the most sought-after commodities in the ancient world. Egyptian temples burned it during religious ceremonies. Roman elites used it in perfumes and medicine. Greek and Near Eastern cultures considered it a luxury product worthy of long-distance trade. The Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote extensively about frankincense in the 1st century AD, describing both its value and the immense profits generated by Arabian merchants. Yet transporting this resin from remote mountain valleys to distant markets required an enormous logistical operation. Caravans had to move the material across difficult terrain. Officials needed to record, store, and protect valuable cargo. Ships then carried the product across some of the busiest maritime routes of antiquity. The mystery is how such a system functioned so efficiently in a region often portrayed as technologically isolated. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence that Khor Rori operated less like a simple harbour and more like a carefully organised commercial hub. Large storage complexes discovered near the centre of the city suggest that significant quantities of goods were accumulated before shipment. Administrative seals and inscriptions indicate the presence of authorities responsible for managing trade activities. This level of organisation implies that local rulers possessed detailed knowledge of taxation, inventory management, and international commerce. Such findings challenge older assumptions that ancient Arabian societies depended solely on caravan trade and lacked complex urban institutions. Instead, Khor Rori reveals a highly organised economy capable of supporting large-scale international exchange. Perhaps the most intriguing mystery concerns the harbour itself. Modern visitors often notice that the lagoon beside Khor Rori appears too shallow to accommodate the kind of maritime traffic described in historical sources. Yet archaeological evidence clearly indicates that substantial commercial vessels once visited the port. Researchers have spent decades attempting to explain this contradiction. Geological studies suggest that the landscape has changed significantly since antiquity. Sediments carried by seasonal floods gradually accumulated within the lagoon, altering its depth and shape. However, many questions remain unanswered. Some scholars argue that the harbour was naturally deeper during the city's peak. Others suggest that local inhabitants may have maintained navigable channels through periodic dredging or other forms of water management. Direct evidence for such engineering has not been conclusively identified, leaving one of Khor Rori's most important mysteries unresolved. If ancient engineers were actively managing the harbour, they possessed a practical understanding of hydrology far more advanced than traditionally assumed. The location of the city creates another puzzle. Khor Rori occupied a position that appears almost perfectly optimized for trade and defense. The surrounding terrain allowed authorities to control movement between inland frankincense-producing regions and maritime routes crossing the Arabian Sea. Freshwater from Wadi Darbat supported permanent settlement despite the arid environment beyond the valley. At the same time, nearby hills provided natural protection. Such advantages required more than luck to recognize. The founders of Khor Rori demonstrated an impressive understanding of geography, environmental conditions, and economic strategy. Their choice of location suggests generations of accumulated knowledge regarding navigation, seasonal weather patterns, and regional commerce. Evidence discovered at the site reveals that Khor Rori was connected to a remarkably broad international network. Archaeologists have recovered imported ceramics originating from the Mediterranean, South Arabia, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent. Roman amphora fragments found among the ruins provide evidence of contact with territories influenced by the Roman Empire, while Indian pottery demonstrates regular interaction with ports across the Arabian Sea. These discoveries are significant because they illustrate how interconnected the ancient world had become long before modern globalization. Merchants operating through Khor Rori participated in a commercial system spanning multiple civilizations, languages, and political boundaries. Goods, ideas, technologies, and cultural influences moved alongside cargo, transforming the city into a crossroads of international exchange. The success of this network depended heavily on knowledge of the Indian Ocean monsoon system. Long before modern meteorology, sailors understood that seasonal winds change direction at predictable times of the year. By coordinating voyages with these wind patterns, merchants could travel between Arabia and India far more efficiently than would otherwise have been possible. Khor Rori occupied a strategic position within this maritime system, allowing traders to move valuable products between inland Arabia and distant overseas markets. The ability to exploit these environmental cycles required generations of observation and practical experience, suggesting that ancient navigators possessed a sophisticated understanding of their natural world. Despite centuries of prosperity, Khor Rori eventually declined. Archaeological evidence indicates that activity decreased gradually during the 4th and 5th centuries AD. The reasons remain debated. Environmental changes may have contributed to the silting of the harbour, reducing its usefulness for maritime commerce. Political instability affecting South Arabian kingdoms may have disrupted established trade networks. Changes in international demand for frankincense likely reduced the city's economic importance. The decline of Roman influence across parts of the Mediterranean may also have affected markets that once consumed large quantities of Arabian luxury goods. Unlike cities destroyed by invasion or natural disaster, Khor Rori appears to have faded slowly as the commercial world around it changed. By the time the city was abandoned, one of the most important ports in the frankincense trade had largely disappeared from history, leaving behind ruins that continue to raise questions about the scale of ancient commerce, the sophistication of Arabian maritime knowledge, and the technological capabilities of a civilization that helped connect much of the known world more than 2,000 years ago. Ulug Depe is one of the most important ancient sites in Central Asia, yet it remains largely unknown outside archaeological circles. Rising above the plains of southern Turkmenistan, near the foothills of the Kopet Dag Mountains, the settlement appears today as a massive mound of earth and ruins. To casual observers it may seem unremarkable, but beneath its layers lies a continuous record of human occupation spanning thousands of years. Excavations conducted by French and Turkmen archaeologists have revealed evidence of settlement from the Chalcolithic period through the Bronze Age, Iron Age into the Achaemenid era. What makes Ulug Depe extraordinary is not merely its age, but the technological, economic, and social complexity that developed in a region many people still imagine as a remote frontier. The site raises a fundamental question that archaeologists continue to debate. How did a sophisticated urban society emerge and flourish on the edge of some of Central Asia's harshest landscapes long before the Silk Road connected east and west? Ulug Depe is located in the Ahal region of modern Turkmenistan, approximately 70 kilometers east of Ashgabat. Archaeological investigations intensified during the French Turkmen Archaeological Mission, led by archaeologist Julio Bendezu Sarmiento and colleagues from the French National Centre for Scientific Research. Their excavations demonstrated that the site was occupied for several millennia, with major development occurring during the Bronze Age. The mound itself rises more than 30 meters above the surrounding plain and covers dozens of hectares, making it one of the largest archaeological tells in southern Central Asia. Its strategic position placed it within a region associated with what scholars call the Bactria-Margiana Archaeological Complex, often abbreviated as BMAC, a Bronze Age civilization that flourished between roughly 2300 and 1700 BC across parts of present-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and northern Iran. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Ulug Depe involves water. Modern visitors encounter a dry environment where agriculture without irrigation would be nearly impossible. Yet archaeological evidence shows that thousands of people lived here for centuries, cultivating crops, raising livestock, and supporting specialized crafts. Excavations have uncovered large storage facilities, domestic architecture, and agricultural remains indicating a stable food supply. The challenge is understanding how ancient communities maintained such productivity in an environment vulnerable to drought. Researchers have proposed that inhabitants relied upon sophisticated irrigation systems drawing water from mountain-fed streams descending from the Kopet Dag range. However, much of this hydraulic infrastructure has disappeared, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct it indirectly through settlement patterns, environmental studies, and traces preserved in the landscape. The scale of occupation suggests that water management was not a simple local activity, but a coordinated system requiring planning, labour organisation, and long-term maintenance. The architecture of Ulug Depe presents another puzzle. Most structures were built from mud brick, a material often dismissed as temporary and fragile. Yet significant portions of the settlement survived long enough to leave clear archaeological footprints after 4,000 years. Excavated buildings reveal carefully planned layouts, thick defensive walls, storage complexes, and large communal spaces. Archaeologists studying construction techniques have noted that builders understood how to maximize durability despite limited resources. The dimensions of walls, the arrangement of rooms, and the use of reinforced mud brick construction, engineering, knowledge that challenges assumptions about Bronze Age societies in Central Asia. Unlike monumental stone civilizations such as Egypt, where architecture survives through durable materials, Ulug Depe achieved longevity using earth itself. The fact that its urban plan remains recognizable today speaks to a sophisticated understanding of construction, maintenance, and environmental adaptation. Evidence of metallurgy has further transformed scholarly views of the settlement. Excavations have uncovered metal objects and traces of metallurgical activity, indicating that the inhabitants possessed significant expertise in working copper and bronze. During the Bronze Age, metal production was among the most technologically demanding activities in the world. Successful smelting required control of high temperatures, access to raw materials, and knowledge passed through generations of craftsmen. The presence of metalworking at Ulug Depe suggests integration into broader economic networks extending far beyond the settlement itself, since many necessary ores were not available locally in sufficient quantities. Archaeologists believe the community participated in exchange systems connecting distant regions of Central Asia and the Iranian plateau. These discoveries challenge older models that portrayed Central Asian settlements as isolated or technologically dependent upon neighbouring civilizations. Trade may be the most fascinating aspect of Ulug Depe because it reveals the existence of long-distance connections centuries before the Silk Road emerged. Archaeological research across the BMAC sphere has documented materials, technologies, and cultural influences moving across enormous distances. Scholars have identified links between Central Asia, the Iranian plateau, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley civilization. At Ulug Depe, imported materials and technological parallels suggest participation in these wider networks. This raises an important question. How were such exchanges organized in a world lacking paved roads, centralized empires, and the transportation systems familiar today? The movement of goods over hundreds or even thousands of kilometers implies the existence of traders, intermediaries, and established routes crossing deserts, mountains, and river valleys. Long before caravans are carried silk across Eurasia, communities such as Ulug Depe may already have formed part of a vast interconnected economic landscape. The site's occupational sequence provides an unusually detailed record of social transformation. Archaeologists have documented layers corresponding to the Chalcolithic period, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and later occupations associated with imperial powers. These successive layers allow researchers to examine how societies adapted to changing technologies, economies, and political conditions over thousands of years. What remains mysterious is the nature of these transitions. In many ancient civilizations, periods of decline are accompanied by evidence of invasion, warfare, natural disaster, or abrupt collapse. At Ulug Depe, the archaeological record suggests a more gradual process. Certain phases witnessed growth and prosperity, while others experienced contraction and reorganization. The reasons behind these changes remain debated. Climate fluctuations, shifts in trade routes, political transformations, and demographic movements have all been proposed, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Questions about political authority are equally difficult to answer. Large structures uncovered at the site suggest administrative or ceremonial functions. Some buildings are substantially larger and more complex than ordinary houses, indicating the presence of social hierarchy. Yet unlike civilizations that left extensive written records, the inhabitants of Ulug Depe did not provide archaeologists with texts explaining how their society operated. There are no surviving chronicles describing rulers, governments, laws, or institutions. As a result, researchers must infer social organization from architecture, burial practices, material culture, and spatial analysis. The existence of coordinated construction projects, irrigation systems, and specialized production implies some form of centralized authority, but its exact nature remains uncertain. Was Ulug Depe governed by hereditary elites, religious leaders, powerful families, or an administrative bureaucracy? The archaeological evidence offers clues but no definitive answers. The site's location has also fueled debate about its broader significance. Positioned between Iran, Afghanistan, and the heart of Central Asia, Ulug Depe occupied a strategic crossroads long before historical records began describing major regional powers. Its geographic position would have enabled interaction with multiple cultural zones. Some archaeologists argue that settlements such as Ulug Depe played a crucial role in transmitting technologies, agricultural practices, and cultural ideas across Eurasia. If this interpretation is correct, then the settlement was more than a local center. It may have been part of a larger network that helped shape the development of ancient society across vast regions. The challenge lies in proving the scale of its influence because much of the evidence remains fragmented, buried, or lost to time. Recent archaeological investigations continue to reveal new information about the site. Advanced dating techniques, environmental studies, and regional surveys have refined understanding of its chronology and economic foundations. Research published through French and Turkmen archaeological collaborations has emphasized the importance of Ulug Depe as one of the key reference sites for understanding the rise of complex societies in Central Asia. Yet each discovery seems to generate additional questions. The settlement demonstrates sophisticated urban planning without written records, successful agriculture in a difficult environment, extensive trade connections before the Silk Road, and technological capabilities that exceed traditional expectations for the region. Rather than solving the mystery, archaeology has made it more intriguing. The deeper researchers dig into Ulug Depe, the clearer it becomes that ancient Central Asia was far more interconnected, innovative, and influential than historians once believed. La Quemada is one of the most puzzling archaeological sites ever discovered in northern Mexico, because almost everything about it raises questions that researchers still cannot answer with certainty. Perched on a series of steep hills in the Malpaso Valley of present-day Zacatecas, roughly 50 kilometers south of the city of Zacatecas, the site was already in ruins when Spanish explorers entered the region in the 16th century. The name La Quemada, meaning the burned place, was given centuries later after observers noticed extensive evidence of fire damage across many structures. Unlike famous Mesoamerican cities such as Teotihuacan, Palenque, or Chichen Itza, La Quemada left behind no deciphered inscriptions explaining who built it, why it was constructed, or what ultimately caused its destruction. The result is a city that can be studied in remarkable detail while remaining strangely anonymous, a combination that has made it one of the most debated archaeological mysteries in North America. The first systematic descriptions of the ruins appeared during the 19th century, but major archaeological investigations were not carried out until the 20th century. Excavations conducted by researchers from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History revealed that the site flourished primarily between approximately AD 600 and AD 900, a period that overlaps with the decline of the great metropolis of Teotihuacan in central Mexico. What immediately surprised archaeologists was the scale of construction. La Quemada was not a small village or ceremonial outpost. It was a vast complex covering hundreds of hectares, containing elevated terraces, defensive walls, plazas, pyramidal platforms, causeways, staircases, residential sectors, and monumental public buildings. Many of these structures were erected on steep slopes that required extensive modification of the natural terrain. Builders cut into hillsides, created artificial platforms, and transported enormous quantities of stone to locations that would have presented serious logistical challenges, even with modern equipment. The most striking feature visible today is the immense network of terraces climbing the hillsides. Archaeologists estimate that thousands of tons of stone were used to create retaining walls capable of supporting large architectural complexes. Unlike cities located on relatively flat terrain, La Quemada required its inhabitants to reshape the landscape itself before major construction could begin. This alone suggests the existence of a highly organized society capable of coordinating large labor forces over long periods of time. Yet the identity of that society remains one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the site. Some early scholars propose that La Quemada was a northern outpost of Teotihuacan, largely because of similarities in certain architectural elements and evidence of long-distance trade connections. Later research challenged this interpretation. Excavations revealed that while contacts with central Mexico certainly existed, La Quemada possessed its own architectural traditions and cultural characteristics that do not fit neatly into the Teotihuacan model. Today, many researchers associate the site with the Chalchihuites culture, which occupied parts of northwestern Mesoamerica during the first millennium AD, but even this explanation does not fully resolve the question of who controlled the city at its height. The uncertainty surrounding its builders becomes even more intriguing when the site's defensive character is examined. Many Mesoamerican cities contain ceremonial centers and elite compounds, but La Quemada often resembles a fortress more than a conventional urban settlement. Massive stone walls surround portions of the complex. Access routes are restricted by narrow passages and elevated approaches. Strategic observation points overlook the surrounding valley from multiple directions. Archaeologists studying the architecture have noted that the site's layout would have allowed defenders to monitor movement across large areas of the landscape. Such precautions imply that security was a major concern. The question is why? Was La Quemada defending valuable trade routes? Was it protecting agricultural resources in a harsh environment? Or was it positioned on a frontier where conflict between competing groups was common? Evidence recovered during excavations suggests that warfare may indeed have played an important role in the region's history. One of the most famous structures at La Quemada is the Hall of Columns, a monumental building that continues to challenge efforts to understand the site's function. The structure consists of a large elevated platform containing rows of stone columns that once supported a roof. Even in its ruined state, the scale of the building is impressive. Archaeologists have debated whether it served political, ceremonial, administrative, or military purposes. Unlike many buildings in central Mexican cities, the Hall of Columns does not fit perfectly into known architectural categories. Its size indicates that it hosted activities involving substantial numbers of people, yet no consensus exists regarding exactly what those activities were. The structure's prominence within the site suggests that it formed part of the city's core power center, but whether that power was religious, political, economic, or military remains uncertain. Equally mysterious are the extensive causeways associated with the settlement. Researchers have documented a network of stone-built roads extending outward from La Quemada into the surrounding landscape. Some of these routes continue for kilometers beyond the main ceremonial center. Their construction required significant planning and labor, indicating that the city was connected to a broader regional system rather than functioning in isolation. Archaeologists, including Ben Nelson of Arizona State University, have argued that these roads may have facilitated trade, communication, political control, or ceremonial movement between communities. The scale of the infrastructure suggests a level of regional organization far greater than scholars once believed existed in northern Mexico during this period. Yet the exact nature of that organization remains unclear because no written records survive to explain how the network operated. The site's economic foundations also remain controversial. Northern Mexico lacks many of the environmental advantages enjoyed by regions farther south. Rainfall is less predictable and large-scale agriculture is more difficult to sustain. Despite these limitations, La Quemada supported substantial construction projects and a significant population for several centuries. Some researchers believe its prosperity was linked to trade networks connecting central Mexico with areas farther north. Archaeological evidence indicates the movement of valuable goods, including turquoise and other resources, across vast distances. If La Quemada occupied a strategic position along these exchange routes, control of commerce may have generated the wealth necessary to finance monumental architecture. However, the available evidence is not sufficient to determine whether trade was the primary driver of the city's growth or merely one component of a more complex economy. Perhaps the most dramatic mystery concerns the site's destruction. Archaeological excavations have uncovered extensive evidence of burning across multiple sectors of the city. Charred architectural remains and fire-damaged structures indicate that a major destructive event occurred near the end of La Quemada's occupation. The scale of the burning was significant enough to inspire the modern name of the site itself. Researchers generally agree that the city experienced a period of decline between the 9th and 10th centuries, but they continue to debate exactly what happened. One possibility is that warfare led to the destruction of important buildings. Another is that internal political instability weakened the settlement before an attack occurred. Environmental stress, resource shortages, and disruptions to regional trade networks have also been proposed as contributing factors. Because multiple challenges may have occurred simultaneously, it is difficult to isolate a single cause. The archaeological record reveals the outcome but not the sequence of events that produced it. Human remains recovered from the site have added another layer to the mystery. Excavations uncovered evidence suggesting that violence was not uncommon during certain phases of occupation. Some skeletal remains exhibit signs consistent with conflict, while other discoveries indicate that ritual practices involving human remains may have taken place. Researchers remain cautious when interpreting such evidence because burial patterns and ritual behavior can vary considerably between cultures. Nevertheless, the discoveries reinforce the impression that La Quemada existed in a world where political tensions, warfare, and displays of power may have been important elements of daily life. The site's enigmatic reputation grew even further because of attempts to connect it with one of the most famous legends in Mexican history. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, some scholars speculated that La Quemada might be linked to Aztlan, the legendary homeland described in later Aztec traditions. According to these accounts, the ancestors of the Mexica people migrated southward from a distant northern homeland before eventually founding Tenochtitlan. Because the location of Aztlan has never been identified with certainty, numerous sites have been proposed as candidates. La Quemada attracted attention because its impressive ruins seemed capable of matching the scale associated with a legendary ancestral center. Modern archaeologists generally reject a direct identification between La Quemada and Aztlan due to the lack of supporting evidence, but the theory remains an important chapter in the site's history because it demonstrates how little was understood about northern Mexico's ancient civilizations when systematic research first began.